So World War One is a huge event. Starts in 1914. It is a long time coming. There's a lot of things that lead up to World War One. It is going to have a huge impact on the rest of the 20th and even to the 21st century. It's a huge, huge event. Despite it being a huge event, I, after having studied it as both a student and as a teacher, I've come up with a conclusion. And my conclusion is that World War One is the stupidest war ever fought. So it is stupid in the way it starts, totally could have been avoided. It is stupid in the way that it is fought, the way that it's actually carried out. And it's also stupid in the way it ends. Mainly hindsight being 2020, it is going to cause World War II. So that is my thesis, and let's get started. There are four main causes of World War One. The four main causes are militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. Some of these four causes are left over from 19th century political developments. Some of them are more immediately impact the start of World War One with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but all four contribute to the beginning of World War One. And it's easy to remember the acronym MAIN since they are the main causes of World War One. So even though the acronym is MAIN, I'm going to explain them a little out of order because it makes more sense from a history standpoint. So if you can remember the acronym in terms of a trick to remember it, I'm going to explain the actual history. So that brings us to the alliance system. So the Triple Alliance is formed in 1882 and it is made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, if you recall who the leader of Germany is at this time, it is Otto von Bismarck. Now, Otto von Bismarck, after he successfully unifies Germany, he's focused on preserving the German Empire. And so, in his opinion, coming up with an alliance between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy would strengthen their position, at least in Central Europe. So if anybody messes with Germany or Austria-Hungary or Italy, the other two countries would come to their back. It is important to note that this is a defensive alliance. This is going to come up a little bit later. Second thing is the Reinsurance Treaty of 1887. Now, the Reinsurance Treaty of 1887 is not necessarily a cause of World War One, but it kind of shows a little bit about Wilhelm II, as well as it shows how smart Bismarck was in terms of securing the German future. The Reinsurance Treaty with 1887 was between Russia and Germany. Now, Bismarck's greatest nightmare, his reoccurring nightmare that he was terrified of, was fighting a two-front war. That would be Germany fighting Russia to the east and France to the west. I'll show you a map in a second. This absolutely terrified Bismarck. So even though he had the alliance with Central European countries, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, he thought that it would be good to have an agreement in a reinsurance treaty, which it was insurance, with Russia and Germany that they would not attack either one. The problem with this is Wilhelm II, who was a peer of Bismarck and kind of resented Bismarck and his success that his father had given Bismarck and the opportunities that he had given Bismarck, he dissolves the reinsurance treaty and is like, why do we need help with Russia? Russia understandably gets a little paranoid, saying, why would Germany cancel this treaty? It didn't really cost us anything. This doesn't look good. So Russia's like, well, we don't want to be invaded by Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. So they go out looking for friends. And in 1907, the Triple Entente is formed. The Triple Entente is made up of Britain, France, and Russia. So this is setting up Bismarck's worst nightmare because not only are they no longer allies with Russia, or at least non-combatants with Russia, they are now surrounded between France and Russia on either side, the west and east side of Germany. They're surrounded by people that are now in an opposing alliance. This is Bismarck's worst nightmare. So really quick, if you look at a map, Germany, when Bismarck unifies Germany, he then signs the alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy, creating the Triple Alliance. He then says, we don't want to fight France and Russia at the same time, so he signs the reinsurance treaty with Russia. So if you look at it, the only people Germany really has to worry about are the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, which, let's be honest, you don't really have to worry about those. Switzerland, don't have to worry about that. So France is the only real potential enemy that Germany has to worry about until Wilhelm II dissolves the reinsurance treaty, which puts Russia, France, and the United Kingdom on the same team, which is called the Triple Entente. So this is kind of the beginning of the end, so to speak. So Bismarck is saying, no, I don't want it. That's Bismarck. The causes of World War I continued. So we've had entangling alliances, which were the previous slides. The second thing are nationalism, imperialism, and this really is left over from the 19th century. The imperialism, we've talked about the scramble for Africa, as well as the nationalist pride and the nationalism in terms of um, pursuing their own interests, each nation's own interests. The crisis in the Balkans is going to become a specific example of nationalism, which takes place in Austria. So, when talking about the crisis in the Balkans we're talking about southern Eastern Europe, basically what Austria controls. And believe it or not, there's some conflict in Austria dealing with different multi-ethnic groups, and one of them is Serbia. So Serbia technically is not under control of Austria-Hungary, but they're right on the border. They are mad at Austria-Hungary for controlling Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they would like to create, this is nationalism again. They want Bosnia and Herzegovina to be under Serbian control, so they're one unified national or nation. Russia supports Bosnia and Herzegovina because of something called Pan-Slavism, which is it's kind of like nationalism if you were looking at family and saying like I'm going to look out after my little cousin. So they're not like directly related. They're not Russian, but they're like Russian cousins, so to speak. So Russians support Bosnia and Herzegovina. Germany is going to tell Russia back down. Don't get involved with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Russia is still licking wounds from the Russo-Japanese fiasco as well as the Crimean War indirectly. You have the creation of the Duma by Tsar Nicholas II about 10 years prior. So this is kind of an issue. Austria-Hungary is a powder keg about to blow. So in other words, you basically have the bomb is set. It would be like putting gasoline, TNT, um, any other explosives in a room, and all you really need is a match. If you get one match, one thing that would upset the different groups involved, that will eventually lead to war. So, militarism is an aggressive preparation for war. And in order to really understand the militarism that takes place leading up to World War I, you have to address some contextualization. So, the last major war that had been fought in Europe was the Franco-Prussian War, in which Bismarck's Prussian military had been um, well disciplined, well equipped, and they basically dominated the French. So the rest of the major powers in Europe had observed this and said, huh, so if that's how you win a war decisively. And so most of the major countries in Europe started aggressively preparing for war just in case a conflict came up, they would be prepared for the war and they could fight. So this could be Germany, Germany, obviously, France, Russia to some extent, Britain. They started aggressively preparing for war. Now, there's two major specific examples that you could use as evidence for this aggressive preparation for war. The first one, aggressive preparation for war. The first one is conscription. This is a military draft. So even though they don't necessarily have a reason to declare war or to um, prepare for war, you have different countries are starting to draft civilians into the military and creating large standing armies. Now, this is said in the interest of defense, or if there is a conflict, we'll be ready for them. But at the same time, it's hard to start a war relatively quickly if you don't have a large standing army. And when most of the major countries in Europe have large standing armies, it seems like they're more likely to use the large standing armies than if they didn't have them. And that's kind of what's going to happen. The second really good example of militarism is a German plan called the Schlieffen Plan. The officer's name is Alfred von Schlieffen. He comes up with this plan. He is looking at Bismarck's worst nightmare, and he says, okay, if there's a chance that we are going to fight a two-front war between Russia and France, no offense to any French, but you would rather fight the French than the Russians, and you definitely don't want to fight them both at the same time. So the idea with the Schlieffen Plan is to surprise and attack quickly and decisively through Belgium, go through Belgium, attack France, knock France out of the war, get them to surrender, and then you can focus all of your military might fighting Russia. So the idea of the Schlieffen Plan is to avoid a two-front war by attacking France through Belgium, hopefully quickly knocking them out, and then you can focus on the bigger, more viable threat. So the way it looks on a map is Germany is going to come through this way, and they're going to sweep down quickly, and Belgium's not going to put up much of a fight. So they're going to come through, and then hopefully they can take France, and then send all of their troops back here to the what will be known as the Eastern Front to fight Russia. So that's the Schlieffen Plan, and that is an example of militarism. And all that you really need, as I mentioned a second ago, is the match. And the match is going to come in the form of an assassination. So Archduke Franz Ferdinand, sometimes it's called Francis, same person. He is the heir apparent of Austria. So he's going to be the next emperor of Austria. He is relative moderate, so he's kind of like, I'm good with whatever. Is not a hardline conservative, not super liberal. He's just kind of in the middle. Him and his wife Sophia are visiting a place called Sarajevo, which if we go back, sorry, if we go back to the map, Sarajevo's right there. It's on the map. They go to visit Sarajevo on June 28th, 1914. And while there, they're driving in a convertible, waving to all the people coming out. And there is a group of Serbian nationalists called the Black Hand. And the Black Hand are what you would consider now like kind of a terrorist nationalist group. And they feel that the best way for them to get Serbia to gain control of Bosnia and Herzegovina is to assassinate the next leader of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they plan on this assassination, and they're waiting. They have some of the old school grenades. They look like bombs. Um, I remember the old Inspector Gadget. I don't know if you guys remember that, but they had like these old grenades and some guns, and they were waiting on the trade or on the parade route where they were going to throw the bomb and assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. With the first attempt, one of the guys, they were kind of a mess. He throws the grenade slash bomb, and it blows up late or early. I can't remember. I wasn't there. But everybody panics. Some people are hurt and killed, but the Archduke and his wife are not. So the driver speeds off and they take off. And the story goes that Archduke says, we need to go back and visit our friends that were injured. We're going to go to the hospital. Well, the driver's not super familiar with Sarajevo. So he's kind of cruising around and he ends up turning down a wrong street. It's like an alleyway where one of the would-be assassins, a guy named Gavrilo Princip, is eating a sandwich. And he looks up and he's like, hey, we were supposed to kill them earlier. Pulls out a gun, shoots both Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia. They are killed on June 28th, 1914. Um, and this is where everything's going to get crazy. So the Austrian Empire, understandably, is pretty upset. They're pissed because their next emperor has been killed. They want to blame Serbia. Serbia's like, we had nothing to do with it. This is some like lone wolf terrorist organization. We had nothing to do with it. Austria gives them a list of demands. So before Austria gives the demands, they go to their ally Germany and says, hey, do you have our back? Germany says, yes, sure. You do whatever you want. I can't believe this happened. We support you 110%. Do what you need to do. We got your back. So then Austria gives an ultimatum to Serbia. It's nuts. There's like no way Serbia can actually meet all the demands of the ultimatum. So Serbia responds. They say, we are willing to do some things. We'll help you find the culprits, whatever, but we can't do everything you said. So they basically reject the ultimatum. So when this happens, when Serbia rejects the ultimatum, Russia is kind of like flexing. They start mobilizing for war a little bit, and Austria's like, what are you doing? Austria declares war on July 28th, 1914, which is exactly a month after the assassination. This is easy to remember, if you just bear with me for a second. So July is the seventh month. It's obviously 1900, so the 14, 1914, and then 28. So if you take 7, double 7, it's 14, double 14 is 28. So if you can remember, it all comes from 7. That helps me remember it. So Austria declares war on July 28th, 1914. Russia is mobilizing against Germany and Austria. Germany says, don't mobilize. Russia ignores them. You're actually going to read a document in a second about this. Russia ignores them. Germany's like declares war, but they run to the filing cabinet. We have a plan for this. We're about to fight a two-front war. We have a plan for this. So Germany declares war. They do the Schlieffen Plan. They invade through Belgium and France. I 11 is kind of an exaggeration. France knew it was coming, and so that is basically going to be the start of World War One. Conclusion: World War One has started because of communication breakdown. Um, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a group, even though, and then Serbia is going to be blamed for it. It is it kind of falls apart. So there is correspondence that takes place between the leaders of Germany and Russia, which further demonstrates that this is one of the stupidest wars. Okay, so now you're going to turn to page 764. I believe it's 721 in the old book. And you're going to read about the communication breakdown between Russia and Germany that leads to the actual war starting. Keep in mind that Wilhelm II and Tsar Nicholas II are cousins, mainly because most of the monarchs in Europe are related somehow. Sometimes they're related in multiple ways. But anyway, so Emperor William II, Tsar Nicholas II, they're cousins. They don't necessarily dislike each other, but one is obviously the leader of Germany and the other is the leader of Russia. So enjoy reading that.